Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 in our Advent series. Today's video and reflection are called The Face of Purity. What gets conjured up in your mind and heart when you think about purity? I think about innocence and wisdom and clarity. Purity makes me think of a crystal stream that runs from a high mountain top that's direct, that's crisp, that's see-through, transparent. Those are some of the things that come to my mind with purity. What comes to your mind? I was reflecting on this because Advent is a time of preparing a space within ourselves and holding a space for the world that newness may come. And think about a newborn baby. It perhaps for us human beings is the ultimate image of a human being in complete purity, right at that moment of just coming into the world, so innocent, an open canvas, ready to experience life and become who they're meant to be in this life. Well, when I was Googling and searching around on the internet, I came up with 2 definitions for purity that are interesting. Both of them have the word freedom in them. The first one is freedom of contamination, and the second one is freedom of immorality. So purity in I don't know which dictionaries it was Wikipedia and one other one, seemed to designate a state that is free of something that is muddied, complicated, heavy, unclear, destructive, inwardly or outwardly violent. But purity is a state of freedom. Now that I really liked. It's a state of freedom. When I think of personal growth and personal transformation, I oftentimes think of the image of what it would be like to be free of the suffering that weighs us down, free of the darkness within that leads us to not realize our full potential, leave us failing in goodness, or just simply failing in being faithful to truth in some way. So purity is a freedom from something, but it's also a freedom into something. Well, during this time of preparation, I was reflecting on 2 things, a passage from the Hebrew text and a story from my own life that I'd like to share with you that I think give evidence to the pathway of becoming more and more pure. When your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. So how do we then come to that single eye so that we'll be filled and we'll be the light in this world? So the first metaphor, and I think gives us a couple insightful points that I'd like to draw upon, comes from Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 and following. And many of you, if you're familiar with any of the Hebrew texts, will probably be familiar with this story. It's a story of Jacob, and he is traveling back to Canaan, and he is sleeping by a riverside one night. He's sleeping by himself, even though he has, I think, 2 wives and a number of children and livestock he's bringing along. So he's sleeping by the riverside, and in the translations, a man, or it's an angel in the form of a man, or it's a man who's really God. So you can look at a couple different translations there. But this angel, I'll call him, comes to Jacob and they begin wrestling. And they wrestle through the entire night. And then morning comes and the angel says, I need to leave, it's dawn. And they keep wrestling. Jacob won't let him go. Even during the night, if you remember, the angel punches him or wounds him in the hip so that he limps the rest of his life. But he's wrestling with him, and the angel wants to leave because it's dawn, and he says, you will not leave me until I receive your blessing. And so this angel gives him a blessing, and the blessing is in the form of a name, and then passes on his way. And the passage ends with saying that Jacob prevailed against God or against the angel. I think this is a beautiful story and metaphor for us during this time of darkness. The sun is setting so much earlier, so we're shrouded more in darkness. And Advent is a time of opening up to the dark places within ourselves so that new light can come. So let me tease out some of what I find the inspiration in this passage. First, the wrestling happens during the night. And Jacob is so audacious that he wrestles, and he won't let up on the wrestling. Think about a time in your life. I can think in my own life of many times when inwardly there's anything, confusion, doubt, consternation, discouragement, despair, full range of things that we may wrestle with, because there's a sense that we're not meant to be left in that state of tension and stress, that we're meant to have peace and joy. So that is the night in our own lives. And Jacob witnesses that we're really given an opportunity to wrestle with what's underneath it. What is the reason that the pain or the suffering has come about? And to be audacious enough not to let go. Even if we get wounded in the process, if our hip gets damaged, if we cry through the experience more than what we want to, if we feel powerless, whatever might be the way that we find ourselves not freed from whatever it is that is our darkness. Now, in the wrestling, the dawn comes about, and as the light is coming, Jacob prevails because of this, because he obtains a blessing. That's the second insight. So the story is interesting because in the darkness, Jacob doesn't prevail because he kills the angel. He doesn't prevail because he gets something, like he obtains a trophy or he runs away with a victory. He prevails because he receives the blessing. Isn't that incredible? So our moving through our darkness, we prevail when we wrestle for so long that it leads us to the conviction that our surrender will bring about the blessing. Wherever there is challenge in life, there is inherent blessing. And before the angel leaves, he receives that. Now, the third insight is that the blessing for Jacob is in the form of a name. The angel changes his name to Israel, one who contends with God. So the very wrestling that he had in the dark becomes part of what he is. Because to name in that culture was to be possessed. Naming was a big deal. That's why we have Yahweh, which is a roundabout way. You get the 4 letters, a circumlocution, because to say the name of God was considered arrogant. It's like you're possessing God, and you can't possess God. So to be named something new is to have a consecration on who and what you are. Jacob was named, a symbolic gesture showing that his very wrestling is a witness for the world and is part of the quality. In fact, his name Israel, meaning contending with God, is evidence of that. So there's a strength and a virility that his humanity is meant to embody. And along with that naming, he in turn names the place. He names it Peniel. And that means facing God. That in whatever this darkness was, he went so far, his eye was clear. He went so far to face God. And again, culturally speaking, if you look at many of the Hebrew stories, whenever someone experiences what seems to be the presence of God, they cloak their faces, because to face God was, you weren't supposed to do that. God was too great to be faced. And so he names the place where he faced God. In our darkness, we're called to face it and to face God in such a way that we realize that power, we embody it. There's a beautiful, more than beautiful, it's a powerful notion called locus illuminati, the illuminated place or position point. And in spirituality, it, especially in cultures that are much older than ours, to name a place is to recognize the vibrational power of the place, because something of the divine happened there. I believe even going forward from that concept that we are meant to be the locus illuminati at every moment. So purity is about wrestling with a single eye, wrestling all the way till the dawn, until what we're wrestling with blesses us. And in the blessing, we become the locus illuminati. And in that, we become free of that limited us and live in purity. Now, I have a fun example for you from my monastery times. So when I was a novice, that's your time of formation, I went through a period where I was having a heightened experience of how impure my love was. Not by my inner inclinations to do anything that was unloving, but even in all my loving gestures, it felt like I had so many mixed motives. And I had felt very humbled this way for about 4 or 5 years. And so it was no surprise to me that it reached a tension. It reached a point where I was incapacitated by my awareness of how impure I was, so that even when I went to do something loving, I felt paralyzed to even do it, because I thought, well, if I'm that impure, maybe even doing loving things isn't loving at all because I'm so impure. So I was wrestling with God on that and very paralyzed. It was like being hit in both my hips and not being able to walk. I went through this state, sometimes they call things like this scruples, where there's such a heightened desire to be pure, and you're realizing you're not pure and you're powerless in the face of it, and everything becomes very difficult. It's very painful. I went through this for a few months, and I remember we were at an evening time of recreation, the older and the younger nuns, and one of the older nuns needed a stool. So I immediately jumped up to offer to go get the stool for her, and I ran down the corridor and I entered the place where we had the little footstools that we would sit on. And when I went to reach for it, that awareness that even my reaching for it was impure, that as much as I was acting out of love and my heart was in the right place, that because I was so mixed inside in general, that I was just an impure human being. Not in that moment, in my intention. I hope that's clear. Just in my not being holy and saintly, that I was paralyzed, and my arm was reached out like this. And I remember it was like the dawn had come, and I was wrestling with the angel. And I was not going to let that angel leave until I was blessed. I needed to be released of being paralyzed because it was debilitating. And it was stopping me from doing really wonderful, loving gestures just because of these scruples. And as I was there, all of a sudden within me welled up this movement of spirit. And I heard rush from my heart up into my head, just do it. And it set me free. And I reached for the stool and I ran back and I gave it to her. And in that phrase, because my eye was clear on what I longed for, I longed to be free just to be loving in who and what I am. And in that longing, I could receive the message, the blessing. And in that just do it, there was a pregnancy of message. It wasn't an order to do it. It was it's not mine to be concerned about how pure or impure I am. But it is mine in each moment to be as loving as I can. Judgment is not mine. Judgment is God's. And in that moment, I tasted a little sweetness of purity. So what for you is the face of purity? And what ways are you being called upon in this Advent to open up in the darkness so that the light of who and what you are may shine with new resplendence in our world? Great to be with you. Blessings, my friends. Mwah.